أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين، والبراءة من أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين. اللهم أنطقني بالهدى وألهمني التقوى ووفقني للتي هي أزكى. اللهم أخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمنا بنور الفهم، وافتح علينا أبواب رحمتك، وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما كان المؤمنون لينفروا كافة فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. And it is not for the believers to go out totally. Why should not then a group from every party of them go forth to become learned in religion and to warn their people when they return to them, so that they may be aware? This holy verse 122 of Surah At-Tawbah highlights the practice of specializing in the knowledge of religion and understanding Islam. And it also alludes to the concept of taqleed, albeit implicitly, when the verse says that not all the community of Muslims should go out to the battlefield. There needs to be a group of them that dedicate their time for specializing in learning. لِيَتَفَقَّهُ. Tafaqquh doesn't just mean understanding, it means deep understanding. Fahm is to understand. Tafaqquh or fiqh is to have deep understanding, encompassing all aspects of the matter that you are studying. We refer to it in our modern language as becoming a specialist in the field of study, not just having general knowledge. You say so-and-so has general information about medicine, but they're not a specialist in medicine. The verse calls for tafaqquh, deep understanding. And it's saying that not everyone is going to have the capacity and the capability to do that, because the Muslim community has multiple roles to play. During that time they had, for example, jihad, the battlefield. And Muslims desire to go for the great honor of being with Rasulullah in the battlefield and help defending Islam against the enemies of Islam. However, the verse says it is not feasible to do that. It is not beneficial and practical that all mu'mineen go to the battlefield. Because who's going to stay to learn and specialize in the Islamic teachings, the Islamic rulings, the Islamic ethics and beliefs, and so on and so forth? In light of this holy verse, I'd like to highlight glimpses from the process of ijtihad, the process of deriving the religious rulings from their sources. And the purpose of presenting these glimpses or these highlights is to appreciate the work of the jurist, to appreciate the efforts, the diligence of the faqih in extracting the rulings from their sources, and not to underestimate their very intricate role and their hard work that is put in order to conclude and present before the rest of the mu'mineen alaykum salam and mu'minat the rulings in a clear way. Ijtihad comes from the word juhd, just like jihad comes from the word juhd. Both ijtihad and jihad come from the word juhd. There's effort. Very unique in the verse that the verse calls the people to the mu'mineen, the community of believers, to divide their roles. Some go to the field of jihad and others go to the field of ijtihad. And both of them have a commonality. Their commonality is juhd, exerting effort, exerting the utmost effort. Jihad, clearly in the battlefield, there's a lot of effort that's being exerted. Now, ijtihad is also an effort-based practice because the jurist does not easily find the ruling. There's a lot of digging and a lot of extracting that takes place, which usually takes time, which usually requires many prerequisites of knowledge in order for them to be capable of deriving these rulings. Ijtihad is not just merely opening the Quran, finding a verse and applying it to the situation, or going to the book of hadith, opening the book, taking the riwayah and applying it to the situation. Ijtihad is much bigger than that. I will highlight, inshallah, a couple of the steps or some of the major steps that are involved in this process to better understand this. But before that, it's important for us to differentiate between two positions or two major roles. There's a difference between the concept or the practice of tashri' and the practice of tafaqquh. Oftentimes people mix between the two. We really need to keep a distinction between the two. It's a serious and it is a very genuine distinction that needs to happen. Tashri' is the practice of legislation. When you legislate a law, that is tashri'. Tafaqquh is the practice of extraction. You're trying to understand the law that has already been legislated. Example of the Constitution. You have the Congress making the law, cooking the law. But then you have, for example, lawyers, judges, whose duty is to do what? To understand the law, to explain the law. When the judge or the lawyer says this law means this, they're not legislating, they're just telling you what the law means or what the amendment says. Another example or analogy that I'd like to use, which I've used in the past, and that is you have a jeweler who makes jewelry. He designs it and makes very appealing and beautiful pieces of jewelry. Then he places them in a box. And then he digs very deep in the earth and he buries that box. But then there are experts in finding hidden jewelry under the earth or deep in the earth. They are specialists. They have certain tools by which they can detect where that jewelry is, and then they would dig and take it out. Those people, when they dig and take out the jewelry, cannot claim that they've made the jewelry. No, they dug out the jewelry. The one who made the jewelry is whom? The jurists. Same thing here. Tashri' is the position of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and those who are vested with that authority, such as the Holy Prophet. As far as the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, there's a difference of opinion among the Shia scholars as to whether they have the same authority of the Holy Prophet to legislate, or they have the principles that they apply in the contemporary or in the new instances that need religious rulings or need to be religiously addressed. Do the Ahlul Bayt have knowledge that has been given to them by Rasulullah to answer all the questions, or they also have the power to legislate? That is controversial. For Rasulullah, he does indeed have the full authority to legislate. So now the power of legislation is one thing, and the power and authority or position of tafaqquh, deriving and understanding the legislations, is something else. Which one does the jurist, faqih, has, or which one is the faqih or the jurist vested with? Of course, it's clear to you now that the faqih is not a legislator. He has no authority to legislate. Hence, his opinion, his personal understanding has no value in this case. Why? Because his role is not to legislate, but to understand the legislation, to derive the legislation. The faqih goes through multiple steps, and each of these steps require prerequisites and discipline and knowledge that he has to be well versed in. The first step is to verify or to establish the authenticity of the text. The ascription. We've talked about ascription in the past, or the attribution. In the Holy Quran, everything, every verse, every word is indeed definite. There's no doubt. But most of the rulings and the details are not in the Holy Quran. They're where? In the Honorable Sunnah. And we said that the Sunnah has been transmitted to us, most of it, transmitted to us, not in means by which we can ascertain that it has been said by the Ma'soom. There is a high probability that it has been said by the Ma'soom, but we are not certain that every single riwayah has been said by the Ma'soom. So now when the jurist says this riwayah says that Imam al-Sadiq said the ruling for such incident is this, we cannot say that Imam al-Sadiq said without establishing that this riwayah is reliable. Can we rely on this narration and say that yes, this can be attributed to Imam al-Sadiq, and therefore we will go further and proceed and act according to this riwayah? And authenticity and reliability of a hadith in and of itself requires a special science known as the science of rijal, the science of transmitters, which is a science that enables the jurist not to only know the names of the narrators and whether they are trusted or not, reliable or not, but to be able to establish the principles of authentication. For example, there are 4 major books written by early scholars from the 4th Hijri century and the mid-5th Hijri century. Those scholars were very close to the time of the transmitters of hadith. They are very knowledgeable about the transmitters of hadith in terms of who is reliable and who is not, who's trusted, who's a liar, who's a fabricator. They have that knowledge. And they have listed certain names in their books, and they have mentioned, for example, An-Najashi, one of the famous rijalis, the transmitters, the one who specializes in gathering the names of transmitters and authenticates them, would mention that so-and-so is thiqa, is trusted, is reliable. Would mention that so-and-so is not reliable. The question is, based on what did you, O Najashi, deem this man or this woman or this transmitter as trusted or not trusted? What is your basis? The jurist doesn't just say, what do you think of so-and-so? No, he says, what is your basis? The basis has to be studied, and the jurist has to be content that this is a basis that can be relied on. Because if he doesn't, the jurist, if he's not convinced that this is the right basis, he would have to look for another basis. One of the simple examples, they say if a Shaykh as-Saduq does tarahhum on someone, is that an indication that he or she, the person who's receiving tarahhum from as-Saduq, saying rahmatullahi alayh, is that an indication that they are reliable or trusted or in good shape, as we say? Someone who you would say is a good person. Why is he a good person? Well, the Shaykh al-Saduq, when he mentioned them, he says, Rahmatullahi alayh, the question is, does saying to someone or about someone, may God's mercy be upon him, does that constitute an indication that that person is authenticating this person? Al-Shaykh al-Saduq, is he authenticating by saying Rahmatullahi alayh? Or if a person who we trust and know is a reliable alim reports from a narrator frequently, is that a sign that that frequent reporting in and of itself a sign that the person who is reporting is saying that the person I am reporting from is trustworthy? These are all different aspects and nuances that shape the principles of authentication. So now the jurist has to not only find out who is authentic and who is not, but they have to be content that the principles of authentication are binding upon him, are hujjah between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first thing is to do what? To deal with the narration of the ahkam, is to establish authenticity based on this very rigorous and complicated process that I've just mentioned the ABCs of, and not even anything beyond. Someone might think that this is the only thing to be done. Once they have established that this is a trusted reporter, then the hadith is authentic and we go further. No. There are other nuances that revolve around this. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. One of them, these ahadith were reported in books. They weren't just floating in the air. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. And these books are attributed to different authors. For example, Kitab Sulaym. Although Kitab Sulaym ibn Qais al-Hilali, Sulaym was a companion of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and his book, his original book is established. The ulama do not have a doubt that Sulaym had a book by such name. But Sulaym, his book is not necessarily a fiqhi book, but I'm using it just as an example to tell you how they would deal with the book when they receive it. The book of Sulaym is mainly historic and has beliefs and mainly talks about the oppression that befell the house of Lady Fatima and the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam. The question is, does the copy or is the copy that we have today correspondent with the original copy of the book of Sulaym? That in and of itself has to be established. Come to Al-Kafi. There are different copies. We're talking about original manuscripts. We're not talking about the copy that you have printed and is sold in the bookstores or online. No, the original manuscript. Because sometimes manuscripts have variances, typos, and the jurist has to establish which manuscript is he going to rely on. Because sometimes the letter could change the meaning. Is it jasad or is it hasad? Jasad means body, hasad means envy. And I think you agree with me that there are two separate things, jasad and hasad. Yes, they both look the same except that jasad has a dot under the ha, which makes it jasad, and hasad doesn't have the dot. Sometimes a simple typo can change. Of course, it's not typo, it's a mistake in the actual writing, because they didn't have typing machines. They were writing and copying and so on and so forth. So establishing the correct copy and establishing that indeed this book belongs to this trusted man who we call Shaykh al-Kulayni. Add to that, identify whether the narrator that is being mentioned in the hadith is the same one that has been authenticated and not someone with a similar name. That's another branch of the ilm al-tabaqat, for example. Because sometimes you have 13 people by the same name. Muhammad ibn Ismail, for example. 13 people. And not all these 13 are considered authentic. Some are authentic and some not. So now you have a hadith that says Muhammad ibn Ismail said, so and so told him, says, Imam says. Which Muhammad ibn Ismail are we talking about? Is he the authentic one or the inauthentic one? So now we have to go and look for clues, look for what we call the clues of the people who reported from which Muhammad ibn Ismail and which he reported from, and figure out which one are we talking about here. You see this intricacy and nuanced discussions that I am just highlighting the very surface level of, not even going into the depth. After the jurist has verified the authenticity of the hadith, or the hadith that he wishes to extract the ruling from, now he has to look for the indication of the hadith, the meaning. Which means he needs to be well versed in which language? The Arabic language. Alaykum assalam, alaykum assalam. Which Arabic language? Is it the common language that we know today? The terminology that we understand today? Not necessarily. Because the Arabic language has gone under some type of evolution to an extent. There are certain expressions that were common during the time of the Ahlul Bayt. Certain words that were known to indicate something. I always use this example. It's a very unique example, but I'll mention it because it's a very simple example. Qahwa. What does qahwa mean? Anyone know what qahwa means? Coffee, thank you very much. That's what qahwa means today. But what do you do when you run across or encounter a hadith that condemns the drinking of qahwa? Condemns the drinking of qahwa. You would think that coffee then we should not be drinking. But the faqih, who is well versed in the context and in the language of the nas and the history of the language, would tell you that during the Abbasids' time, contemporary to Imam al-Sadiq, Imam al-Baqir, Imam al-Kadhim, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, and so on and so forth, from the rest of the Imam alayhi salam, one of the names of khamr was qahwa, or one of the brands was qahwa. So here when the hadith is reprimanding those who drink qahwa, it is not talking about our qahwa. It's talking about khamr. The Quran uses the word hoot. Hoot. Musa and Khidr forgot what? I don't want to talk about the word forgot because we say the Ma'soom doesn't forget. But left. Left their hoot. فَاتَّخَذَ سَبِيلَهُ فِي الْبَحْرِ عَجَبًا. There was a sign that when this dead fish turns into a live fish and goes into the sea, know that this is the place where you will meet Al-Khidr, according to one tafsir. فَاتَّخَذَ سَبِيلَهُ فِي الْبَحْرِ عَجَبًا. What was this hoot prepared for? Musa tells his fata, what does he tell him? Atina ghada'ana, bring us our meal. So that means Musa was going to eat what? A hoot. Today in the Arabic language, when you tell someone what is a hoot, they tell you it means whale. And are whales permissible to eat? They're not permissible to eat. All prophets could not eat whales. They're not permissible to eat. So how could Musa eat a whale? And why would he even need to eat a whale? There were just two people. No, whale or hoot in the Arabic language means fish. Whether it is a whale or not, that's something else. It just means fish. But today when you say hoot, right away comes to mind whale. It has evolved to an extent. Now, these are very simple examples just to give you an idea how the language could have an effect. I'm going to take you a little bit further to a topic that is a little bit more intense. Walayatul faqih. You know, the ulama that believe in the absolute and full authority of the jurist have their evidence. But the ulama that believe that the authority of the jurist is restricted, also they have their evidence. I'm not going to get into the many ahadith on this side and the many ahadith on this side and the adil. No. I'm just going to give you a very simple example to show you how the faqih would look at the single word and can reach a conclusion, or it can be a factor in his conclusion, the understanding of the word. The very famous hadith known as Maqbulat Umar ibn Hanbala, the accepted narration of Umar ibn Hanbala. One of the things Imam al-Sadiq says about the scholar from the Ahlul Bayt, the faqih from the Shia, because the person who asked the question, Umar ibn Hanbala, says, what do we do when two of us have a dispute over inheritance or over a debt, and you tell us you cannot go to the court system because the court system doesn't judge based on our laws, it judges based on the other schools. It's not permissible that we as mu'mineen go to the court system. We have to go to the faqih. So the Imam says you need to resort to one of you who has known our ahkam, who has studied them, and make him a hakam. فَإِنِّي جَعَلْتُهُ عَلَيْكُمْ حَاكِمًا. I have made him a hakim over you. Group 1 that says the Imam has given this faqih or the fuqaha the full authority, they say hakim means ruler. Hakim means ruler. Hakim does have the indication of ruler, and it's used also to mean judge. The second group, such as Sayyid al-Khoi and the people that adopt his understanding, they say no, hakim here means qadi, means judge, it doesn't mean ruler. So the jurist has the authority to judge, but not ruler with absolute authority. Other ulama that are in favor of walat al-faqih would assert that no, we don't understand this from this. We have contextual clues that no, this means hakim, as in ruler and not qadi. Perhaps they might tell you because the Imam used two different words. He says, فَلْيَرْضَوْا بِهِ حَكَمًا. Let them accept him as a hakim, hakim, judge. فَإِنِّي. Why are they going to accept him as a hakim? Because I have made him a hakim. So they're saying there must have been something else other than hakim. Hakim is judge, hakim is maybe ruler. Because he's a ruler, he has authority. One of his authorities is that he's a hakim. But then the other party would respond and back and forth. It remains a controversial topic. But you see, one of the factors is what? One simple word. Hakam, hakim. Is it judge or is it ruler? This is all after we have established the authenticity of the narration. Now we're dealing with the meanings of the narration. Then we come to the third step. After we have established authenticity, established the indication and significance and meaning, then we have to go to step number 3. Is there an opposing hadith to this hadith? Because we have a phenomena in the books of a hadith called the phenomena of ta'arud, conflicting a hadith. And there are reasons for that. One of the reasons for conflicting a hadith, a very famous reason, is taqiyya. When the Imam wants to preserve the lives of his Shia, and he would issue a ruling to some of them, while he would issue a ruling to that is different to other. And then these Shia come, they report that the ruling for this matter is this. The other group of Shia say, no, the ruling is this. So now you have two hadiths. Both of them are reliable. Both of them for Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. What do you do? Which one do you go with? This is where now you have to apply the laws of conflicting hadith, the laws of ta'arud. One of them is to find when this ruling was issued, under which ruler of the tyrants, and figure out that ruler, which of the jurists did he make the official jurist of the state, to see which one of these two ahadith aligns with the ruling of the jurist of that tyrant, and know that this was done as a sign of taqiyya. Because if that ruling was aligned with what Al-Mutawakkil Al-Abbasi adopted and the jurists that were under him, then we know that this was issued in the state of taqiyya. And then we take the other one. But of course it is much more complicated than this. It's not just as simple as that. There's a lot more to establish. And sometimes it's hard to establish. So what do we do in this case? What do we do in that case? We have conflicting ahadith. Sometimes the conflicting ahadith are resolved by going to the date of issuance. Ahlul Bayt have taught us, take the later date if it opposes the earlier date. Because sometimes there are circumstances where the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam would issue a ruling that is specific to a circumstance. That circumstance has ended and now a new circumstance has arisen that changed the ruling. All this has to be put into perspective. And every word and every principle I alluded to requires establishing that it is authoritative and binding, and it's just not, do it because that's the way to do it. No. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is Rasulullah, is the Imam endorsing or authorizing us to act according to this principle or that principle? Hence we have a ilm called ilmul usul, the science of usul al-fiqh, the principles of Islamic jurisprudence. This science studies the bindness or the authoritativeness of every principle that the faqih adopts. Who says that you can rely on a hadith that has been reported by trusted people? We said this hadith engenders what kind of knowledge? Dhann, not ilm. Because there's a possibility this trusted figure had made a mistake or had lied. So therefore, you're not certain the Ma'soom said, but you say, I will still rely on his hadith. Who says you can rely on a khabar that is dhanni? This requires ilm al-usul. You have to establish by using ayat or established ahadith to prove your point, to prove that this is binding and authoritative. So now after we have verified the hadith in terms of authenticity, understood the meaning, fixed the conflict, we go to the fourth step. The fourth step is that sometimes you're not able to fix the conflict. You're not able to fix the conflict. Or the incident that you're looking for does not have an authentic hadith to start with. So what do you do in this case? Do you tell the mu'mineen who are asking about the specific matter, I don't know, we don't have a ruling, just do whatever you like? No. Islam has given us principles that are called usul amaliyah, procedural principles in cases of not knowing the actual ruling that the faqih must resort to. One of them is the principle of bara'ah, principle of exemption from the obligation, which means that when a jurist seeks to find evidence to establish whether this is wajib, whether this is haram, and he cannot find that this act is either wajib or haram, he cannot tell you that do whatever. No, he'll tell you it is not wajib and not haram. You are absolved from the responsibility. You are exempt from the responsibility. Why? Because we have a hadith, a principle that says رُفِعَ عَنْ أُمَّتِي مَا لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, in which the Prophet is reported to have says, that which my ummah do not know has been lifted from them. So now you're exempt. Hence you find that in some matters, when the jurist receives a new subject that has not been addressed in the ahadith, contemporary, and he doesn't find any reference to it, nor does he find that there's a general principle that can apply to it, then he would say, you know what, you're not obligated to leave it or to do it. So it's permissible. And I don't want to mention some examples because some of them might take time and become complicated. So you see these steps that are involved in this very rigorous process. This allows us and gives us the understanding of the most complicated aspects in this process. In general, we're not saying that we have now encompassed all of it, but it gives us a general idea of how complicated this process is, such that we would appreciate the faqih and not accuse the jurist when we don't understand why he arrived at this ruling or that ruling. You know, like we are a day away from Eid, And usually this controversy or controversial issue about Hilal that arises and people start giving inputs. Why can't the jurists come together and agree on a ruling? Why can't we just follow science? Why? The faqih listens to this, he feels like, how do I explain it to these people? I'm not the one that makes the ruling. I am the one that digs to find the ruling. And I have all these complications in front of me. They don't know what I'm going through to find the ruling. And I have to answer to Allah if I issue the ruling this way or that way. It's not that I like this or I don't like this. It's not that I have knowledge about astronomy or I don't. It has nothing to do with the hadith that I am dealing with. Whether I like astronomy or not, does the hadith by Rasulullah give me the permissibility to act accordingly? That is the question. And this is where ulama differ. And sometimes the same hadith understood by one alim that it indicates, alaykum salam, that it indicates that you can rely on the sighting of any place on earth, while another might say, no, this means to rely on the area that shares the same horizon with you. What do you do in this case? Tell this faqih, dismiss your opinion for the sake of unity? He's going to tell you, it's not my opinion, but this is the understanding based on the principles that I have established, which is authoritative and binding over me before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الخلق أجمعين نبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Anybody have a question? Brother Adam, if you have the microphone, please. Anyone? A sister? Yes, sister has a question. Because the ahadith are also specific and detailed. Yes, when you go, for example, to the chapter of tahara, purity, you'll find hundreds of ahadith. The Imam was asked about this matter, then he's asked about this matter. And one woman came and asked about this issue, and another came and asked about that matter. This is where now they collected and put it in the order of what we say, mawdu', the subject, the thematic order, and try to figure out how to reconcile between these ahadith and how to conclude from them altogether. It's like a puzzle, but a very intricate puzzle. Not just a puzzle, but a very complicated one that they have to work together to take out these pieces. Hence you'll find differences, because there's no way a human could come to this very intricate puzzle and arrive at the same conclusion, alaykum salam, as others who are dealing with that same puzzle. Assalamu alaikum. Any other questions from our brothers? Yes, a brother has a question here.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Sayyid, I have a question for you. So, and this is all opinionated really, in terms of, what you would consider the best, or and in terms of the Quran. Say, for instance, you're struggling through an uphill battle, whether it be through school or whatever hardship befalls you. In your personal opinion, and this just is literally your opinion, what would be the best Quranic chapters to read or recite to get out of that hardship or difficulty that you might feel like, and I'll use a quote from the Quran where Allah talks about not putting His servant a burden on them where they cannot bear.
Correct. Allah never puts anybody under pressure that they can't bear. The person himself assumes that they can't bear, but they actually can. Because we are always entitled. We feel that we are entitled to convenience. We feel that we need to live in a convenient life in this world, and therefore as soon as we are tested, we start to say this is beyond my burden. It's not beyond my burden, it's beyond my convenience. But we mix convenience with burden and capacity. This is often the scenario or the situation. Now what we have to keep in mind is our problems are not always resolved just by reading a chapter. We have to look at the root of the problem. Reading a chapter is like someone who goes to the doctor to cure an illness, and the doctor says, here's the prescription, but also I need you to take some supplements and some vitamins. I go take the supplements and ignore the whole prescription, it's not going to cure me. I'm going to be in the same circle. Yes, the Quran is powerful, but the Quran teaches us that you have to follow the correct path of arriving at what you want. There are chapters you read to get rizq, but can I read them and sleep? No, I still have to go to work to get rizq. I get barakah and rizq. But one of the chapters that helps, insha'Allah, is that of Surah Al-Inshirah. أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ الَّذِي أَنْقَضَ ظَهْرَكَ وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ, until he says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. He repeats it twice. Verily, with hardship is ease, not after with, which gives you so much hope that in every hardship there is a way out. So that's a chapter that can be recited. But like I said, more importantly, we have to evaluate and assess the situation. Why am I in this hardship? Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I put myself in this hardship. Maybe I have done something that resulted in this hardship. A lot of the times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُم. Most of the time the masa'ib and the hardship that befall you are from your own doings. Either your own doings directly or others. Now the people in Gaza who are suffering, who's throwing rockets at them? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, it's other human beings that are apparently human beings, but in reality they are not human beings. They have, proved that they are far beyond a human. Can't even compare them to beasts, because even beasts have some level of mercy and they are created to be beasts. But these people who were created to be humans choose to act worse than the beasts. So therefore, we can't blame Allah in saying that He's putting more on us, because we are in the world of a test, and we are in this test together, and sometimes we cause each other hardship. But relying on Allah, following the steps that Allah has taught us through rational means, we will arrive at conclusions and solutions, inshaAllah.
Shukran.
أحسنتم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. 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 أشهد أن